why aren't most people killing a late season buck, in your opinion?
For one, you got to hunt food. I mean, it's all about food, and they got to have a secure place. It depends on how bad the weather is. If the weather's really severe, they want a south-facing slope. They want a bed close to food. They'll move out of their normal areas, and they'll move closer to food and stage up there close to food. Probably the reason most people weren't successful is their access. You know, you can't go in and push a bunch of deer. You got to be able to slip in and slip out. Usually when you hunt a food source, you got one opportunity unless you got a great access. You get in, and if you blow the field when you're coming out, I mean, you may have a bunch more does come out, the small ones, but the mature bucks are going to shy away from it. They're going to hold off back in the timber or whatnot until the light fades.
Lights,
camera,
follow the trail.
ready to shoot.
If you know where a deer's bedding and you know where he's eating, that deer should be dead.
Camera.
If you're passive on a deer, what you're doing is you're teaching them.
I've got 30 bucks in the Michigan record book. Everyone but one has had at least one previous wound on his body. Some had as many as 4.
The Exodus Podcast,
Your source for all things whitetail.
Heath, welcome to the Exodus Podcast. How's it going?
Good. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for hopping on here. Really excited to kind of hear how your season went. And, you know, we were just talking, it's the last day of the year. And typically people are hopeful this time of year. They're making plans, they're making resolutions. And maybe someone's like, man, I just want to kill some more big deer. So hopefully you can help them out with that.
Well, that's always one of my resolutions too. So
yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, take a chance to introduce yourself here. You've been on the podcast here a couple times, and then we did a Whitetail Cribs episode with you as well. So people should be familiar with you, but in case they're not, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, first off, Jake, thanks for having me on. I appreciate you and the crew. You've always been good to me, and I love talking whitetail. So my name's Heath Cisco. I live in Southern Ohio. I've been bow hunting since I was probably 13, and I've been bow hunting, upper 30s years. So long time. I started pursuing trophy whitetail when I was 18. I say trophy whitetail, Pope and Young class whitetail, and I've just made it a passion of mine, and I put forth a lot of effort every year. Things change over time. I up my standards. Usually what I do is I set out my goal for a certain class of deer in the beginning of the season. And then as the season winds down, it's around this time of year. It's usually the second week of December. I start targeting older class bucks. If I can't find a larger buck, and I love bow hunting late season. It's my favorite time. So this time of year till the end of season is pretty much my favorite. So
that's interesting. And you have a nickname that kind of coincides with that,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. A couple of my friends started calling me Iceman because I love being out there when it's like totally miserable and as cold as can be. So
yeah, which is even a little bit more funny because I think there was a mob hitman that was nicknamed the Iceman. So
yeah.
You're kind of like the mob hitman for late season mature bucks. So
yeah, Byron Horton made a neat little thing of me or whatever. It was pretty funny, but anyway, so.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, one question I have for you. So you've been bow hunting for 30 years. You progressively have improved, or I guess made your goals a little bit harder to achieve. How much, because obviously year 1 to year 5, most people probably get a lot better. And then I would assume maybe like year 5 to year 10, they get a lot better. What has been some of those milestones for you over the years where you notice that you were getting more efficient with, chasing specific bucks that you're after? Did it get, is it from year 15 to year 30, did it get easier?
Yeah, I think so.
Uh-huh.
I think one, depends on how many animals of the caliber you're after you have to chase. That'll decide your success in a lot of ways. Now there's a lot more opportunity for larger class deer, but the land access is a lot worse. So, it's a give and take. But me, used to, if I killed a good one every 3 years, I'd be happy. But I learned over time that, if you put forth a lot of effort and you start hunting in the beginning of the season and you hunt smart, you can make that success a lot more often. And that's what I've done. And then I've expanded to a couple different states. So that's helped as well. And then you're just being around the right people and learning, listening, picking up on the right things. In the beginning, when I started out, I had a couple, let's say, mentors that I looked up to, and it kind of led me down the wrong path. I found out that the way they hunt, it doesn't work for me, and it doesn't work for most people. So I had to find my own way. I take in all this information, especially now there's all kinds of information, and a lot of it's great information. I listen to most of it. And I take in some of it and I apply it, and others I just completely ignore. It is what it is,
Yeah. What are some things?
You got to find their own way.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think that's something that everyone probably struggles with at some point, of trying to emulate other people. And maybe their terrain isn't the same exact thing as what, the person they're trying to emulate. What's something that you cringe at that is maybe a strategy right now that you're like, it doesn't work for me, and it's kind of a plain and simple way?
Well, I mean, I don't want to pick on anybody particular, but and I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to pick on people, but thinking that you can get away and mask your scent, I think that's one of the main things that I struggled with back when scent lock first come out. Let's say, for instance, I thought that I could use a skunk cover scent and put on scent lock and be invisible to deer, and it just didn't work. And I hunted that way for several years, thinking that one time I would have a deer come by and I could get by with it, and the next time I couldn't. So there's a lot of falsehoods in that mindset. It's just time and effort. And then a lot of people take, like right now it's big mobile hunting. You got to move, you got to do this, you got to do that. Some instances you don't have to move. You're in the right spot. You just got to let it play out. Some of my friends that hunt bigger timber or whatever, they'll find a stand and they'll hunt it 3 or 4 days before that buck makes his loop back around to come through. And me in farm country in different areas, sometimes that's not the case. You go in there, you do a one and done, and you move. So it just depends. But a lot of this information is out there, but people will take it, and that's how they'll apply it, and that's all they'll do. You got to take each bit and piece for each different situation. What I'm doing here in Ohio, Southern Ohio, in a lot of farm country stuff, doesn't work for Nathan Killen down in the mountains in Virginia. It just doesn't work. And so we each got to different situations. You got to apply different things.
Yeah, I think that. Do you think that this comes with experience, in your opinion?
I think it comes with experience, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Move on to something else. I've tried to listen to a lot of successful whitetail hunters and apply it, and sometimes it just doesn't work. You got to find your own way. But there's things that they're doing I can pick up on and apply. It's the same way like me and my buddy Justin Hollingsworth. What he does up above Columbus sometimes is a lot different than what I got to do down here in Southern Ohio. So even though we're only an hour or two apart, it's just different.
Yeah, that's interesting. You kind of allude that you listen to a lot of the content. What are some guests that when you see them come on a podcast, you're like, I got to listen to what that guy has to say? or it could just be shows in general. I mean, I'm a podcast jumper. I jump around a lot, because there's a billion of them out there. But I guess whether it's a guest or other resources that you found to help you or maybe provoke some additional thoughts on your end.
So, one of my mentors in whitetail hunting is Andre DeQuisto. So I listen to everything he says, and that's just because I always have. He's been very successful in all kinds of different hunting environments. So listen to him. I listen to a lot of your guys' podcasts too. I like hearing, a different realm of things. I mean, like Chad, he's not now in Kansas and stuff like that. I like hearing his experiences. But somebody like, then you go to another perspective, let's say Nathan Killen. I love listening to his stuff because he's just down to earth and real about things. And then my buddy Justin Hollingsworth, I like listening to him too, because me and him talk all the time. But then when he sits down and goes through one of these, I can pick up different things as well. And then another one that I really respect, and because he's limited on time and stuff, is Andy May. I like listening to him. And then, listen to Josh Profit for running cameras. I mean, this dude's a beast when it comes to running cameras. Yeah. And then you got Ryan Glitsky on the other end, who he's just a grinder. I mean, he'll sit out there forever, hunting these mountain deer in Pennsylvania. I just pick up on different people, and I like Ben Rising. I like listening to him because he's very successful. He's from Ohio. He's down to earth. He just has a mindset that he's a killer. So I like listening to people like that.
Yeah, that's cool. And one question here before we move on, in terms of just 30 years of experience, was there any specific moments you're like, man, I really feel like I have things more figured out than in the past? Like whether it was a specific lesson on a deer or a specific tactic that you moved. And I think you kind of alluded to just optimizing for what you're doing, like what that sit's supposed to be. But like, is there anything going through your thought process of making the most out of every sit? Or is there some sort of lesson or ethos or thing that you just constantly run through your mind that has made you more successful?
So I think that one thing that made me more successful is hunting at the right time. Because I have a family, most people do. You don't want to go up there and burn out a bunch of days at the wrong time. Let's say the wrong weather conditions, the wrong time of year. So being more efficient and understanding deer's habits, understanding what they're doing in the early season, during the rut, and then in late season. So if you can learn those, like an early season, it's all about the whole time. It's all about food. And then there's a brief time in there where it's about breeding. But in the beginning of season, if you concentrate on food, they got acorns, is there a green food source? They're not going to be moving very far from their bedding. You just can't set up in a rut funnel in a beginning of October and expect to be successful. And I used to do that, but I've learned over time I wasted my time. So, and in late season, you can't set up over a rut funnel and think you're going to kill one. You got to find food and get in between their bedding and feeding.
Yeah. Well, yeah, let's talk about late season. I mean, obviously that's where that's your favorite time to hunt. So I would say, why aren't most people killing a late season buck in your opinion? What are a lot of people doing wrong in your opinion?
For one, you got to hunt food. I mean, it's all about food, and they got to have a secure place. It depends on how bad the weather is. If the weather's really severe, they want a south-facing slope. They want a bed close to food. They'll move out of their normal areas, depends on what the pressure is, and they'll move closer to food and stage up there close to food. And probably the reason most people aren't successful is their access. You know, you can't go in and push a bunch of deer. You got to be able to slip in and slip out. Usually when you hunt a food source, you got one opportunity unless you got a great access. You get in, and if you blow the field when you're coming out, the mature bucks, I mean, you may have a bunch more does come out in the small ones, but the mature bucks are going to shy away from it. They're going to hold off back in the timber or whatnot until the light fades. Mm-hmm. And then hunting different weather conditions. Like this front we just had come through the west, right before Christmas, this big polar vortex or whatever they called it. Several of my friends think it's going to be good hunting, in Southern Ohio before the storm hits. And I looked at the weather, and, it's supposed to rain most of the day, be in the 40s, and then be in the 40s up until about 10 o'clock at night, and then the bottom was falling out of it. Mm-hmm. So I told them, in my opinion, it wasn't going to be any good at the beginning, the first day, because it was raining all day, overcast, dreary, and the temperatures were still high. That night, the temperatures were going to fall out. We were supposed to get a couple inches of snow. And the next day, the sun was going to come out a little bit, but it wasn't going to get above like 11, 12 degrees. So my opinion was that the next day was the day to be hunting. And I had one friend went out the next day and killed a good buck. And my cameras were on fire that evening.
Same.
So it's just figuring that out. But the thing about it is, most people are working people. So you can't just pick and choose the days that you're going to go hunt. You got to hunt when you're able to hunt. And that makes it difficult at times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so can you explain a situation where maybe hunting the front part of a front in late mm-hmm. season is it typically the backside of the front is better, or is there an example where on the front part of the front, it could be better?
I like hunting the backside because it's easier to predict. The front side, the deer, sometimes they may get up, the front may be coming in. It depends on when it comes in during the day. Most hunters want to hunt in the evening, but a lot of times when the front's coming in the evening, the deer may start moving at noon. So it's hard to get in there and get situated and predict when they're moving. The day after the front, especially if the sun comes out or it's kind of a clear bluebird day sky with the temperatures real low in late season, you can predict that they're going to be moving fairly early, but it's usually going to start around 3 to 4 o'clock. And then you got your evening hunt. When my cameras that I had, my cell cameras that I had out the day before the front, like I said, this one came through in Southern Ohio. It rained. It rained most of the day. It was overcast, dreary, and it was in the 40s. So my cameras, I started having deer come past my cameras around noon. So if you're a hunter, do you sit out there in the rain all day, or do you go out there and try to do your last 3 hours of set in the evening? What kind of success are you going to have? You could blow them out when you go in. It just depends. Mm-hmm. Now, to hunt the front end of a front, I like it when the front just hits all at once instead of drags into the drop in temperature and all that stuff. Like if we got if that 40-degree weather was dropping to do the teens at 4 o'clock in the evening, and that snow was supposed to hit at 4 o'clock in the evening, and there was a little bit of drizzle leading up to that, well, then I would be able to hunt that. I would want to hunt that. Mm-hmm. But the way it was going to be 40 degrees till 10, 11 o'clock at night. So in my opinion, it just had them moving throughout the day sporadically, and then it dropped off, and then it really picked up the next day. So.
Yeah, that's exactly what I saw on my cell camera. So what you described, like that random mid movement in the day, and then when it was like negative 10 degrees here in Illinois, and then no movement, like hardly any pictures at all, and then the day after, the fields were full. So that's
yeah, so you just said you've seen that on your cell cameras. Look at the information and the data. I don't know how long you've been running them, that we've been able to gather on cell cameras over the years to be able to predict deer movement, because you take a guess on what's going to happen, and then you watch your cameras either prove you right or prove you wrong, and you learn off of that. Used to just pulling SD card cameras, you would see the weather, but then you would have to get your mind set back to when you're going through each day and try to, line them up. And it isn't as, you can't learn as well as you can with cell cameras. So,
Do you think that's something that people don't think about enough when running cell cameras, of being able to test hypothesis in real time?
I don't know. I assumed everybody did it, but I mean, maybe it's just, I don't know. I do it.
Yeah,
And then I
likewise.
have conversations with my buddies about it. Hey, how did your cameras do? Did you do this? Did you do that? And we all try to learn off each other. So,
Yeah. One thing you mentioned there was the access. I think maybe this is a mistake that just to highlight, where people do set up on the actual food source for late season hunting, and then they bust the deer out when they leave. And then like, well, why are they showing up after dark now? So is it paramount to hunt that transition spot from where they're bedding to feeding so you can get in and out? Or do you sometimes set up on the actual food source when you feel really confident?
I do both. The hard part about late season is, time and the weather, and then getting past all the non-target deer to get to your target. I mean, because a lot of times there'll be 10 to 15 deer, maybe more, coming past you or coming out into the field at different places while you're trying to get your target buck. And can you get past those deer to have an opportunity at your target buck? But if you hunt a food source that you don't have very good access, I want to sit back and watch it one day if possible, figure out exactly where he's coming out, and hopefully he sticks to that pattern 2 days in a row, and then jump in there and take him out instead of going in there and hunting one day to figure out where he's coming out. You know what I mean? Because I may be 2 trails off. My yardage is only up to like 30 yards is all I can shoot, or all I feel confident in shooting, especially in late season with all the close. So I want to make sure that when I go in for the kill instead of going in for an observation where I'm in the mix of the deer and screwing things up when I leave that evening.
How often do they take the same trail 2 days in a row?
Well, in late season, a lot of times bucks, they get in a mode to where they're just doing the same thing every day. So it's kind of like early season. Now it has failed me before, but it's the best shot.
It's hunting.
You got, so.
Yeah, it's hunting.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Well, on some of these farms that you're hunting, maybe in farm country, you're trying to manipulate any trails to where they have less entries to a main food source, so you can try to mitigate that.
Well, there's always little areas that funnel deer down, and then there's other areas. It's just like a wood block that they're coming out into, let's say a pick bean field or pick cornfield, where they can come out anywhere. And you just got to take the best shot. A lot of times you can figure out the bucks like bedding in a certain spot, and they like traveling in a certain spot. So if there's no interference, like a coyote coming through, another hunter or something like that, generally they'll do the same thing. So, but usually with the weather and stuff, you only get a couple days where they come out in the same spot, and then they may not come out till after dark, or you got to throw in moon phase and on top of weather. If you don't have the greatest weather, well, then what is I say moon phase, but what is your transit moon time? Is it a red moon to where the moon draw is making the deer or wanting the deer to come out right at prime time in the evening, stuff like that. So
okay, now one question people probably have right now is, okay, so they do an observation sit far away from the food source. They see that deer come from the trail that they're going to set up on the next day, but the wind shifts, does a 180. Do you still see those deer still use the same trail during late season, or is it? It's so situational depending on where the bedding's at, but is there any? Does that go into your consideration of how we might enter that field the day after if the wind goes from a north to a south, but it's still provokes a sit for you? Because as I'm saying this, well, if it's probably a south wind, then it's probably not. That cold front probably has left. So I think you get what I'm trying to say. So do you have any additional information about that?
Exactly what you're trying to say. And it's a gamble. Maybe that new wind doesn't allow you to get where you want to get positioned. So and that's hunting, and that's why some people are successful and some people aren't. I would prefer to have a wind condition that's the same the 2 nights in a row.
Sure. And
it allows me to have good access, and I can do that. But if it switches, man, you could jump in there that one time and think he's going to do the same thing and screw yourself. But you got to hunt, especially if you're only allotted a certain amount of days. So.
So let's say Ohio has a pretty late archery season. So let's just say for the month of January, how many sits are you typically doing in an average year? I mean, obviously it's dependent on weather, but just so I can get a frame of reference, are you hunting 5 times and they're very high value sits, or are you hunting, 15?
So running cameras and observation sets. I can't even say they're hunting sets. They're just basically observation sets where you're so far out of the game that you don't even need to take your bow most of the time. But hunting, when I go in after one last year, the buck I killed was on January 17th, and it was 2 sets. But I
So
made those 2 sets being the sets. Well, it's actually, I'm sorry, it was 3 sets. I got busted on the 2nd. I hunted the beginning of the front on the 16th, and I killed him after it had passed on the 17th.
okay. You got busted by the buck you ended up shooting?
Yes.
So
It was about 90 yards away from where I actually killed him.
yeah,
Coming to a pit cornfield.
yeah. Tell us more about that.
So he was coming to a pit cornfield. It was a lot of deer coming to that pit cornfield, and I went in. I knew he was coming around the side of this ridge, but I didn't know exactly what trail he was on because my camera was at the edge of the cornfield. So I set up on one of the trails that I thought he would come on, and he came out a little different. He came straight towards me instead of up on the hill a little bit because I was set down towards the bottom of the ridge, lower part of the ridge, and when he was coming down through there, he was picking through, and I went to get my bow out of the bow holder, and he looked right up at me. Because, in late season, there's no foliage. You got to get in the crotches of trees. You got to get in the cover. And I wasn't in for that trail. And I never even realized that trail was as good as it was till I got up in the tree because it was a hanging hunt. And when I got up in the tree, I could see that trail. And I was like, you know what? That's a faint trail. Them other ones are hard dirt trails. And I thought, what's the chances of him coming down through there? And he was only the second deer that came down through there. All the other deers were up on the other trail. So it's just how it worked out. And I thought that, I was done, that I wasn't going to get a chance. But we had that, he was still coming into that field just late. And we had that big weather front come through on like the 16th. I hunted the beginning of the front and it rained. And the weatherman didn't predict it. It was supposed to start snowing around 4 o'clock. Instead, it started raining around 4 o'clock. The temperature stayed up till about 11, and then they dropped off. So I didn't hardly see a deer that evening. It dropped off pretty sharply to, went from the mid 30s down to the high teens, and we got like 6 inches of snow. And then the next day, around noon to 1 o'clock, the skies cleared up. And I just knew I was going to have success, or at least see him. Mm-hmm. And I went in that evening, and he comes strolling through with a bunch of other deer. So,
yeah, that's not often you get you goof it, and then you get an opportunity the next day.
Yeah, and that was I was on the 2nd when I screwed it up, and then I killed him on the 17th. So, yeah, okay. You don't. And it was I was probably 90 yards away, and I guarantee you when I set up that time, that when he was coming through downwind of that tree that I'd hunted before. So
yeah, use it to your advantage in some form or fashion. Because I think a lot of people would probably, I'm just going to sit there again. Which is once again like figuring out how to optimize every sit to the most of your ability. Now you mentioned a cornfield. I mean, is that what you're typically keying in on late season? Is that your favorite late season food source, or are you a beans guy?
It just depends. I mean, this cornfield had a lot of corn in it from where it was wet. The farmer couldn't get it all out real well. So corn is really good. Beans in Southern Ohio, bean fields, we don't have any, I don't leave standing beans up or whatever. So beans are, it seems like they're not as good to hunt as corn.
I agree.
But then, in Southern Ohio, we don't have really good weather at times or whatever. So if you have, like our front has come through, today it's supposed to get up to like 50 degrees. So winter wheat would be the food of choice now because it's warmed up. The temperatures are higher, it's above freezing. So I try to get away from grain and start hunting green. And, it may be winter wheat. It may be a hay field that's got some green sprouts coming up. Could be a clover field, or it could just be browse and stuff inside the woods, like honeysuckle and different things like that. So,
yeah, it's funny just how dependent everything is for late season, like with just what you explained. Because I think if people always want the shoebox, well, I planted this, so I'm going to have a great late season opportunity. And then I have 10 acres of standing beans behind my house, and it hasn't been frigid enough to where they really haven't hit it. I mean, it just hasn't, it hasn't really had the drawing power of what some people would think initially with that much standing beans. But and I wish it was standing
I
corn.
found a standing bean field here on one of the properties I hunted where the farmer didn't go across the creek, and it was about an acre. And we had some, pretty decent weather, but there wasn't hardly any deer tracks in it. They wasn't
Yeah.
coming to it.
Yep.
And it's just, I don't find that in Southern Ohio, to where standing beans is something that you want to invest your money and time in. Now, I'll hunt them, or I'll at least check them out.
For
but
sure.
it's more, and in Ohio, you can bait. So this time of year, not a lot of people are doing it, but we got our muzzleloader season coming up next week. So there'll be corn files put out everywhere. So that's a completely different thing compared to just hunting in the real world, where you got to go off of crops and stuff like that. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so you had success in Ohio, and then you did not fill your Illinois tag during the rut.
So I started out hunting in Kentucky. Kentucky season come in like the first week of September. I had several bucks in velvet that I was trying to kill. A buddy of mine, we hunt the same farm together, he ended up killing one. And, that's the first time I've ever hunted Kentucky. So I learned that as soon as the first acorn drops, the whole game changes down there, because I've never really hunted when the first acorns drop, and that was around probably around the 12th of September when the acorns started falling, and it completely scattered our deer. And so I didn't have any luck down there. Come back to Ohio, was able to get on a buck that I've had 3 years of history with, and was able to kill him around the 13th. He was coming to a food source, a clover field. And then I left for Illinois about the 25th, 26th of October. And the weather was crappy. I mean, got that, we had a good cold spell throughout October, probably better than we've ever had. And then it warmed up, and I had some tough hunts out there, and I spent a lot of time. And then I went straight from there to Iowa, and I hunted 10 days in Iowa. And I ended up, I had to come home around the 13th. And the weather finally got good around the 10th or 11th. So I only got a couple really good days of hunting in out there, and just time frames and work schedule, I wasn't able to spend a bunch of time out there. But I seen a lot of good bucks. I just didn't get an opportunity at the quality buck I was after. So.
Mm-hmm. So do you plan on making a trip back to Illinois here? I mean, our season doesn't go as deep as Ohio. I mean, we have about 3 weeks here in Illinois.
Yep. So I'm planning on going back here in just a couple weeks, about a week and a half, actually.
And are you going to go? So let's say, I mean, right now I had my window open in my office yesterday. I mean, it was pretty warm.
I'm going the last week of season. So.
Okay. So you'll go out there and you'll just ride it out no matter what the weather is.
Yep. So, and I told so I can get back to that, but yes, the last week of season, I hope the weather changes, it gets colder and stuff like that, or goes back down to cold, but it is a red moon that week. So I feel that if the weather isn't perfect, I can still get good deer movement. But what I did learn on my trip to Illinois and Iowa this year, I left for 2 weeks, and I learned that, for one, I don't need to be hunting that long. For one, it's too hard to be away from the family and all your obligations and stuff like that. And then I went out there, and there was several days that were just wasted because the weather was so crappy. So either pouring down rain or really warm, the deer weren't moving. So the farm I was hunting, I hunted it for almost a week, one in Illinois, and I seen 2 good bucks. One of them was a shooter, the other one wasn't, and the movement wasn't very good. And then a buddy of mine went out the following week when the weather changed, and it was just like a whole new farm. So you need to, but when you set a vacation up, you got to go when you can go. But man, I would have liked to have been able to go out and give it 4 or 5 good days on good weather conditions, then come back home for a couple days, reset, then go back out and hunt, instead of just grinding out the 2-week time period. And a lot of times just having horrible hunts. Or I could have come home for 3 or 4 days, 5 days, and then went back out when the weather was right, and then really, hopefully had more success.
Yeah, which I assume that's probably it. For your vacation time, do you just block out the month of, or like the last 2 weeks, October and first half of November?
I try usually to go the last week October, and then the first week or 2 of November is what I try to do.
Okay.
But like this time, in Iowa, the weather turned good on the 10th. So, and then I hunted, the week before. So I wish I would have, noticed that, hey, the weather's not going to be great. So I'll come home and sacrifice that, get back to work, do what I need to do at the house, this and that, and then head back out when the weather was going to turn. Because the guys that I hunted with out there, they all started having success right after I left.
Yeah.
But, it was dead. We were struggling before that. And then as soon as that weather changed, because, I mean, it was, it was, it was 80 degrees. It
Yeah.
was 80 degrees one day, and then it was like 24 the next.
Yes.
So in 80 degrees, I'm hunting in pouring down rain in 80-degree temperature to where all I got on was a little t-shirt and my rain jacket. I mean, it wasn't smart, but it's a long drive. It's what I had allotted for work, and it's just how it works out. I had a good time. So
yeah, well, that's once again, I think it's hunting. Like sometimes I think we all lose vision or sight of that too. It's, we, I don't know, me personally, I'm used to not winning. So I look at it as hunting, and that's sometimes you got to maximize the opportunities when you do. And so if you're,
I used to put a lot of pressure on myself to have to kill one and, want to, get one down and this, and I don't care anymore. I've killed enough to where, it's the experience. I want the biggest buck that I can find. And if I don't get it, I don't get it. It's not that big a deal. And even with social media now, it puts a lot more pressure on people and this and that. But, I've killed enough deer. I don't have to prove anything to anybody. I'm doing it for myself. I love to video because I like sharing it with my family and sharing it with friends and, put it on the internet and stuff like that. But I'm not doing it to prop myself up. I'm doing it because this is my experience. Do you know how many times I've went back and looked at my other videos and stuff that I've made just to reminisce? I mean, it's great.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just how quick you can go back into a memory when you rewatch something. You're like, oh wow, I forgot that, or it sparks another memory. And to your point, definitely is rewarding. So I would say, so you're just going back that last week of season here in Illinois for the red moon. Can you just explain? I'm a guy that does not pay attention to the moon. So can you explain why the red moon excites you for that last week of season? So the third week here in January.
Weather trumps everything. Doesn't matter what the moon phase is, whatever the weather's doing, that'll, kind of you can predict deer movement off of that. The moon, everybody goes moon phase. It's really the positioning of the moon for me. When the moon's directly overhead, directly underfoot in the prime time of deer movement, let's say the first few hours of morning or the last few hours in the evening. It just, how you can drive around and let's say the weather's been flat for a while. I mean, it's just consistent. It's just mild. And you don't see any deer. And then one day you're driving around and in the evening they're out everywhere. And you're like, is there a front coming in? Because that's the first thing you think. Or what is it? Well, you can correlate that with the app on your phone of the Moon Guide. That's what I go off of. Adam Hayes has. And you look at it and think, well, heck, the moon's overhead, at 6 o'clock, and you're at 5:30 in the evening and these deer are all up and moving. So you can correlate that with that. The same way with that we talked about with the weather fronts and stuff with cell cameras, you can do the same thing and start comparing that to the moon. If your weather's flat, the moon will completely drive the deer movement most of the time. If the weather's changing and you got different fronts and stuff coming in, the moon isn't as important.
Okay. Yeah. So it's kind of just an additional variable or factor or multiplier on deer movement in your book. Okay. Got it. Now, do you plan on hunting mornings during that time frame in January, or are you just scouting in the mornings? I mean, break down what that week looks like for you.
So the week will look like for me, I will hunt in the mornings. Late season, a lot of times I normally don't, especially when I'm at home. I mainly, if I usually scout, try to find one or whatever, and then I'll locate them with the camera and then go off of that. And it's usually all an evening game for me at home. When I go out there, I'm going to be out there. So yeah, I'll hunt a couple hours in the morning. Then I'll get down, I'll go check a different area out. I'll run, one of the things I like doing is running, I got cell cameras out there right now. Me and Justin Hollingsworth running cell cameras out there all year long. Well, probably about 5 months, but I like taking cameras and putting them on a time lapse, setting them on the edge of fields. That way I can go observe this field in the evening or a morning, and I can have 2 or 3 other cameras at different fields or whatever and set them on time lapse, and they'll tell me what happened here yesterday morning or what happened here that evening. You know what I mean? That way I get different eyes in different places instead of just where I'm at. But I'll get back into timber in the mornings a little bit. It won't be, let's say I got a big buck coming out into a bean field. I'm not going to get back in there and try to hunt close to his bed. I'll go to another section of the farm and hunt that in the morning to see if I can catch any activity of a buck that I'm not aware of.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Kind of a scout hunt.
I don't want to screw my good evening spots up. I'll put my morning spots elsewhere and then I'll concentrate that on the evening. I don't want to jack with the deer in the morning and then jack with him in the evening if I have to.
Sure. Yep, that makes sense. Now, when you're running cameras on time lapse, are those standard, or do you have a setup with your cell camera where it's taking a picture like every 10 minutes or something?
So the ones I'm doing are just standard cameras.
Okay.
So I'll just swing through and pull the cards.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
And then
I haven't, to me, I mean, I haven't really ran cell cams on time lapse, to be honest with you. I mean, I think that would be great, but I haven't done it.
yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, you have to go and check them for sure. But when you're down there, and obviously hunting out of state is a little bit different as well. But I think time lapse is something that everyone can probably utilize late season that most people probably don't think about.
Yeah, used to, I never utilized that very much, but man, it's a valuable tool. I mean, I used it early season this year in October. I had this buck coming out that I killed. I was coming out to a clover field and a winter wheat field, and I wasn't for sure exactly where he was coming in there, and I didn't want to go in there and blow the field out, just trying to find out where he was coming out. So I set up different cameras on posts around the field, and it told me exactly where he was coming out. So,
Question I have for you. So obviously during late season, everything's more open. The deer have been hunted here for multiple months. Do you take in consideration of deer potentially being more wary than what it was in October? And maybe that's just because you can get away with more because there's more foliage and everything else. But do you change your strategy at all, or a level of aggression during late season, knowing that they've been hunted for a long time?
I mean, every situation is different, but I hunt lower. Let's say in October at times I'll get up there higher in a tree to where I can see better, but I got plenty of foliage and back cover. Late season, I don't want to get up there and skyline myself. I want to get down the crotches of these trees, multiple trees, position my stand in them, those places. And then I don't want to be right on top of the trail. I want it to be 20, 25 yards because, when it's cold, any movement of just moving in your stand, your clothing, your bow, a squeak, I mean, anything. I want to give myself a little bit of distance, 20, 25 yards. In October, I don't really care. I mean, I'd prefer if they wasn't at the base of my tree, but if they are, they are. It's warmer weather, everything works better, and then you got plenty of foliage. And when they look up in a tree in October, all they see is leaves. Now, this time of year, I mean, they can look across the wood line and see a blob, or movement. So you got to try to position yourself better, in my opinion.
So, and I'm sure this is dictated on the tree, but when you say lower, as a rule of thumb, is that like 8 to 15 feet, 8 to 12 feet? And I know it just depends where it's at.
Low to me is probably 12 to 15 feet.
Okay.
That's low to me. I mean, I don't hunt any lower. I mean, I'm not one of those guys.
Okay.
I mean, I want to get up there a little bit, especially in October. I mean, I may hunt 12 to 15 feet, but I like getting up there a little higher myself. I like getting up around the 18 to 22, 24 feet range myself. I think it depends on how you're trying to manipulate your scent, when it's, when you got a, high pressure day where your thermals are going to be rising, I'd prefer being up a little bit, and that way it'll pull my scent up better. If I'm hunting next to a ditch in early season and I'm playing them thermals, to where, in the evening, it's going to be sucking my wind down that ditch or whatever, well, maybe I'll hang a little lower, but I'm not one of them low guys because I move. I mean, to be honest with you, I move too much. I mean, I just flat out, all these, people pushing this hunt low thing or whatever, and to each their own. I move way too much. I had a GoPro over it was a GoPro over my shoulder once when I was hunting, and I didn't realize the thing was still on, and it videoed me for like 45 minutes. And I went back and watched that. I realized what I did, so I went back and just stuck in the computer, had time, and watched it. I move way too much. I mean, you got to be a statue when you're hunting low like that, because them deer can pick you off. I was moving my binoculars. I was pulling my phone out, turning my head, and I consider myself a good hunter. But I would say most people, if they run a GoPro or a Tacticam over them and watch what they do, they'd be like, I got to change things up.
Yeah, I know. I'd be guilty of that too, because it's just one of those things. I'm kind of a fidgety person to begin with, let alone when you're sitting there and you're focused, and then you're like, well, yeah, that's a great point. And so having optimizing the sit, making the most of it once again to try to get away with as much as possible. And to your point of trying to manipulate the thermals and how high you are and everything else, depending on what the situation is obviously a great point. Okay. So here's another question. I know there's no shoebox answers, but is there any rules of thumb when it comes to late season bedding versus the rest of the year? Is there, when you're hunting a destination food source, and maybe once again, it just depends where the cover's at, but is there any just general rule of thumb of, okay, this is where he's feeding tonight and he's there at 4:30 in the daylight. I think he's within 200 yards of that food source. Is there anything that you try to guess or think about, or is there anything there? Is it just completely situational?
Well, you can always, it depends on what you want to do, but you can always, from preseason scouting or the past shed hunting season, scouting or whatever, you can always kind of determine on where they're going to be. There's certain places they like bedding more in late season when the weather's kind of bad than, in early season or during the rut. And when it's really cold, I mean, they'll position themselves to where they're in the sun. They like south facing slopes. Most of the time they like some kind of green browse, green briars, honeysuckle, or something close to them. They bed kind of in that because, at times maybe they won't move out. Maybe when the weather comes in that's bad, they just stage in that one area and they hang out in that one spot. And you can determine that by just going in and scouting, especially if it snows on, and looking for beds. That's the easiest way to do it. And snow, you can learn so much. We don't get a lot of snow in Southern Ohio. I kind of hate that, but the snow is just a blueprint laid out. I mean, you can backtrack these things. You can find out exactly how they're manipulating terrain, moving through cover, headed to these food sources. Especially when a fresh snow. I mean, you can see all kinds of stuff by looking at that. But just going back in there and jumping them out and seeing where they're at, is another way. But I don't want to do that when I know he's coming to this field. I'll give him that back there in that cover, and I'll try to hunt him on the edge of that field. But maybe, like in early season, that's what I normally do too. But when push comes to shove, I want to jump back in there and find out where he's at, bust him out of the bed, try to get right there where he's at and catch him coming back in early season. In late season, I'll go back in there maybe and push him out to see where they're at, but I'll just use that to manipulate on how close I can get to him in the evening if he's late coming to the field.
Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't necessarily be concerned if someone right now is listening, they're like, I need to kill a late season buck and I'm really concerned about bumping him off the parcel. You necessarily wouldn't be overly concerned. Obviously, you don't want to be reckless, but you wouldn't be concerned to go in there and see, okay, this is where he's about it. This is how he's using it, and trying to figure out that transition.
If you have the best food, or a destination food source where they're coming to, and depends on what your neighbors are doing too. If you got another guy across the fence that's like in Southern Ohio that's putting out 200 pounds of corn every other day, you don't want to go pushing the deer and changing it to where he's going to go over and start positioning with him. But if you're in an area to where there's not a lot of hunters and you have a good food source where they're coming to, I would try to catch him coming to that food source first. And if that wasn't working for you, then I would go back in there and find out exactly where he's at. Or I would inch back in there and set up and then try to catch him coming out. But if you can't figure that out, if you don't know for sure, go back in there and push him out. I mean, how many times coon hunters, rabbit hunters, squirrel hunters, just somebody taking a walk goes back in there and pushes these deer. You only want one thing that I learned from, and Bobby Worthington talks about this. If you go in there to screw up an area, and Andre talks about it as well, if you go in there to screw up a farm, screw it up one day. Don't screw it up 2 or 3 days in a row, and don't screw it up once a week. Go in there that one day and blow it out, learn everything you can, and then position your stands that same day. Then go back in there and hunt and be strategic and sneaky and this and that, and pick those places apart, hunting them with that information you gathered when you blew it that one day.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Now, a lot of people are running one mobile set, or maybe they have one set of saddle, a saddle and a set of sticks. Do you ever have multiple, like 2 stands with you and you set 2 different options if you were to do something like that? Or do you typically just roll with one?
Sure. Well, I always roll with 3. I mean, now I don't have them with me on my person when I go in every day. But what I like doing is, like when I go out to Illinois, what I'll do is I'll have 3 mobile sets with me, and they're almost identical. So it's like nothing's different. So I'll take one, I'll go scouting, I'll take one and hang it for my morning hunt the following day. Mm-hmm. Then I'll take the other one and I'll hang it for that evening hunt. Then what I'll do is I'll go in the next morning, I'll hunt that spot. And if it's in either a good spot or I had some good success or I need to move it, then I'll adjust it as needed for the following morning hunt. That evening, I'll go in, I'll climb right up into the set that I had before, unless something changes and I find something else. That's why I got that third one. You know what I mean? Then I can just throw it on my back and go over and jump up in a tree somewhere. Then I'll hunt that evening in that spot. And if it doesn't work out for me or whatever, then I'll leave it because I don't want to, if I'm hunting edge of a food source, I don't want to be tearing that thing down and having deer out in the field. I want to be able to slip down out of the tree and get out of there. And then what I'll do after my following morning's hunt is I'll slip back in there if the wind's right, and then I'll yank down that stand and adjust it wherever I need on that field edge or somewhere else, and then put it back up. I try not to, in late season, I try to have my stands preset, but that preset may only be preset for that one hunt. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So once again, optimizing your time and having that set really dialed in for those specific conditions after you've scouted it, postseason scouted it, and have an idea what they're going to do.
Yeah, because I mean, to be honest with you, I don't, especially in the morning, I don't like going in and hanging a set and then it getting daylight, and because I don't like shining the light around everywhere, it getting daylight and I can't shoot anywhere, or I'm 20 yards off. You know what I mean? Because I'm not in the right spot. In the evening, I don't really like going in there, and especially in late season. I don't like going in there and making a bunch of disturbance and stuff. I say a bunch of disturbance. These stands are slick to possible. But in early season, I don't mind throwing a stand on my back or during the rut and just going in and hanging a stand and getting up in a tree. That doesn't bother me at all. But in late season, I want to try to when I go in to hunt, there could be deer moving already and they can see a good ways away. I like having a preset stand.
Mm-hmm.
But like I say, that preset stand may only be there one day, that kind of deal.
Yeah. How often are you trying to cut specific tracks during late season to figure out, you get a picture of a deer, are you going to go in there and try to cut a specific track and see what trail he used? So someone has a cell camera on the corner of their food plot. They get a picture of the deer. There's fresh snow. He's the only big deer that was in that field from what you could tell. What do you do then?
Oh, if you got the snow, and if you can distinguish a particular deer's track, I mean, that's like having trail camera pictures of him everywhere, because you'll be able to pick that out when you're walking through and looking creek crossings, the edge of a field. If you can distinguish that track, that is a game changer, because that way you can tell, okay, well, he came out here. Well, he's also coming out here, and he's also coming here, and then this is where he's headed back in. You can tell all that. And then if they got to cross a creek before they go up to their bedding, well, you can determine where he's crossing the creek pretty much. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, that's something that I think maybe most people don't try to act. Everyone, and it's a sweeping statement, so I apologize. People disagree, but most people probably over rely on their trail cameras and don't try to take that next step to where they're trying to cut a specific track. And then to your point, super powerful once you figure it out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I watch reels on, I guess on people's stories and stuff. And I follow Johnny Stewart. Yeah. And I watch him pick apart tracks and from Pennsylvania. Man, it's just like, this guy gets it. I mean, it's interesting, and people need to take advantage of everything they can, and man alive, snow with tracks, or just if you can distinguish a deer's track and you find it in the dirt and whatever, it could be a game changer.
Yeah. I mean, right now, obviously the snow melted off, but the ground's really mushy right now. I mean, you could still probably cut a lot of tracks and follow it for quite some time. Okay. Now you obviously, you love late season, but why specifically is that? Why do you think it's one of the best times to shoot a big buck?
Well, because when I go out to hunt, I'm usually going to see my target buck, and I usually see every buck on the farm. I mean, it's just because the way I hunt the weather fronts, or right after I hunt weather conditions, and then hunting the moon. It's just the deer are all moving. They're all yarded up together. You'll see, I killed a buck January 22nd. It was 8 degrees out. And of course I hunt out tree stands. I don't hunt out of blinds, or box blinds, but I seen every buck on that farm that evening and had all of them come by me. He was the last one that came by me going to a pick cornfield, and I was able to take him. I mean, you can't get a hunt like that in early season. No. Or even during November, very rarely, if there's one doe in heat and they're all chasing them. But I seen every single buck of a 450-acre farm, every single buck that I knew about and had a trail camera picture, they'd come through in a single file. And it's just, I seen like 30 deer that night. I mean, that's
cool.
You can't beat that. So
yeah, for sure. That when you have the food source, late season hunting can be really fun. Now, let's say someone is, Yeah, this all sounds great, but I'm hunting by permission. I don't have any of those big food sources or a manicured plot. What would you tell someone like that to possibly key in on, or any advice there?
Sure. Well, to start with, I don't have standing cornfields or standing bean fields. Mine, if I hunt agriculture, I hunt
It's what's
permission.
there. Yeah.
And I have a couple leases, but I mainly hunt permission. And I have I have two farms, so they're small, but I plant green plots on them. But you
Is
just
that because of the size? Just real quick.
the size of them.
Okay.
Because I mean, I can't plant one of them. I tried planting 3.5 acres of corn on, and they had it ate up by October. So,
Okay.
it is a waste of my time. Plus, once they ate the corn, the field was vacant. There was nothing in it. They wouldn't come to it. So I plant winter wheat, rye, and turnips, and then clover. And that's constantly the winter wheat, rye, and then the clover is constantly kind of growing. And the clover will die out, but then I still have the winter wheat, and then I have the turnips and stuff for them to come in this time of year to pick apart. So that's what I try to do. So
And then, so for the people that don't have that green plot on, that kill plot, what were you going? And I interrupted on for those people.
Well, I think I kind of lost track as well. So you were talking about people that just let's say they're hunting just big timber, or they're hunting a permission farm to where all the crops are picked, and maybe they've even turned over half of them. That kind of deal. They're always going to be going somewhere to eat, whether in the big woods they're headed to, whether they're staging in like a greenbrier thicket or something like that, or where they've cut timber and all these treetops have come down and got all the little buds. And then like a year after the timber's been cut, you got all these sprouts coming up everywhere, and they go in and nip on all them buds. There's always a food source. You just got to find it. In a farm that's got, let's say, half of it turned over, and maybe a picked bean field, and there isn't much out there, they're still out there eating the stalks, eating the shells, and eating even some of the bean stubble roots and stuff like that. You just got to find out where they're going to, and scout and scout and observe. That's the only way you can determine it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the don't give up mentality, and they're there somewhere. Go find them, and
and if you have
that's at.
snow, it makes your job 10 times easier. If you don't, well, then you just got boots on the ground. And then I would go into a farm. Most farms anymore, if you get permission on, they're probably 40 to 150 acres. I mean, if you're getting permission, most of the time it's hard to get on these bigger farms and stuff. Just go in one day and completely scout it apart, pick apart every bit of it, determine where most of the deer looks like. You got to pay attention for looking for browse, seeing what they're nipping off, seeing where the tracks are, seeing where their droppings are, and seeing where, is there south facing slopes, or is this where you're finding beds? Find all that, and then one day, and then go back in and start hunting it here and there, and with observing or just getting in a good spot and seeing what happens.
Yeah, that's great advice. Now, we had a call with Byron this morning, and I asked him if he had any questions for you. His question is, what if you're hunting a specific buck and then you find a shed? And now it's like, well, the deer I was hunting, I'm not shooting them now. What is your specific advice for someone like that? Like they're starting at ground zero in some way.
I can understand why he's asking that question. He had a really nice buck and end up finding sheds. And that's when you're hunting late season. I mean, I found sheds. I found a set on Christmas Day one year. Some deer, when they get injured, they'll kick their antlers off earlier, and other ones just shed early. It just depends on what it is. So what I would do is, he knows where that buck's going to be probably next year. I would just completely vacate that and go to another spot and start scouting and try to find another one. I mean, there's nothing really you can do.
Yeah, for sure.
Because there's no sense jacking around in there unless there's a second buck, because he's already shed.
Yeah, and then maybe it's a silver lining to your point, because now you have even more information for the following year. You have the shed antler, so to your point, he'll be more efficient next year. But that's the fun thing about late season. There's a lot of variables, and to your point with snow and being able to dislocate, and to your point when they're yarded up. Usually, would you say when you find a good area, it's pretty clear just from the sheer amount of sign, or do you see some of these bucks even still somewhat secluded?
It depends. Bucks have different personalities. Most generally, they'll yard up, and the mature bucks on the farm will be in one area, and they'll all kind of be hanging out. They'll be running together. I've had other ones that seclude themselves still. They're just loners. They're off by themselves. They don't move a lot, during daylight, and you just gotta. Each one of them has a different personality, and hopefully, so the ones that group up, sometimes they can be harder to kill than a loner because you got to get past all the other ones to get to him. The loner one, you only got to deal with him. So just depends on what situation you're in, and you won't know that till you get in there and hunt and scout and figure out what's going on. And like we talk about the deer shedding, I mean, you got to be careful. When I kill a deer in late December or January, I mean, I check their antlers out. I mean, I don't want them to pop off, but if they do, they do. But I don't want them to pop off. I had a buck, a large buck that I was hunting. I hunted him last year, but I was first found out about him and was hunting him the year before. And I finally got the weather front, but it came through on Christmas Eve. And on Christmas Eve, the first time I had him in daylight on camera, he was in there like an hour before dark. And that's the first time I'd ever had him on camera in the daylight. And then like 4 days, was it 4 days? It was about 8 days later, he shed one of his antlers. And it just, I've lost everything, because that was the one deer that I wanted, and he lost one of his antlers. So I went in there and tried to find it and this and that. But I used that information to get on him the following year. And I come a hair from killing him the next year in October. It never happened, and then he ended up getting killed. So
here's a question for you, and this is something that I think about a decent amount is, do you think there's benefits of hunting a specific buck versus hunting a caliber of deer? And the reason I ask that is, I think a lot of things in life, if you're hyper focused on one thing, you're probably more likely to be successful versus hunting a general, like, okay, I want to shoot a 130-inch deer. And then when your focus is split a bunch. Would you agree or disagree?
No, I agree. I think you can learn more by hunting an individual deer, but I tell you what, it's hard when that individual deer either disappears or gets taken out. You can talk to Josh Profit about that. He learned that very well this year. But I usually hunt a particular deer, a specific deer rather, in Ohio especially, because there's usually a certain caliber that I'm wanting to take. When I go back out to Illinois this time, I'll be hunting a caliber deer. And that caliber deer may be a certain score, and it may also be a certain age, so it depends on what opportunity I get. I mean, I love to kill older, age heavy, deer, no matter what the score is. But, I also, my passion through October, November, and into December is killing the largest antler deer I could find. So
what if he's a giant 3-year-old? What if he's a giant 3-year-old?
I won't shoot it.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't. I can't say that. I shouldn't say that. Let's say giant 3-year-old. I mean, it depends on how big your giant is.
170-inch 3-year-old. This is an anomaly.
In Illinois, I couldn't pass it up. In Ohio, I would pass it up because I would have more time to concentrate on that thing next year. In Illinois, what's weird is a lot of the deer we have on the farm that I hunt a farm with Justin and a couple other people. The deer from one year to the next usually are not around. I don't know why. And very rarely do you have a buck that you passed up this year show up next year. Like last year, we had 2 deer on the farm that were 140-inch typical 12 points. And they were like 2-year-olds. And I mean, they were like 140-inch typical 12s. And I thought, we're going to have a 200-inch deer in 2 years if this thing makes it. Neither one of them show up this year. So,
do you think that has to do, I'm picturing it probably a little bit bigger ag country than where you're at in Ohio. Do you think that has to do with crop rotations, or do you think that they just die? Or do they?
There's a good bit of hunters around. And plus, I think that the section of property that we have has such a large pull from, there's thousands of acres of just open crop ground. And then we have like the best timber, I guess you could say, in bedding. And they just kind of push in there when the crops are taken out. But there's tons of coyotes. There's a lot of people that hunt, a lot of hunters around that area. And, it's just, these deer, they're out there every day, and it's a lot for them to survive, to get to a 4 or 5-year-old deer.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. Well, I think this should definitely provide some advice for people that have a tag in their pocket. Now, let's say someone already filled their tag and they're not nomadic, they're staying in their home state. What would be something that people should be doing right now for next year in terms of scouting or any other things that should be on the forefront of people's mind for next year?
Sure. Well, like with me, I've already filled my high tag. I can't say I've ran some cameras. We have a muzzleloader season coming up here next week. So I haven't got out and really put in a lot of late season scouting yet. I want to wait till the gun seasons and the muzzleloader season, which is in for like 4 days starting next week. Wait till that gets out, and then I'll start picking apart different areas, farms and stuff. Maybe try to get more access, stuff like that. And just doing boots on the ground scouting. It depends on if I'm in farm country, I can go through and look at every crevice and everything and see where everything's at. And then even in the bigger timber areas, where I see the deer sign right now doesn't mean it's going to be there in the next fall in October, because they shift a little bit in these bigger timber areas. So just learning the terrain, maybe as the time goes on, lucking out and finding a shed. I don't put a lot of time in shed hunting anymore like I used to, because I'd put all this time in just trying to find a deer antler instead of setting myself up for the next season. So
That's an interesting point. So yeah, I think there's something to be said about that too. So you think you're more of you would prefer to scout than necessarily specifically shed hunt?
yes. Yeah, used to, I just shed hunted all the time. I wanted to find every shed I could find. But what I found is I was going to different areas that I wasn't going to hunt the following year, or I wasn't learning if I knew where a big deer was, I wasn't trying to figure out everything for him for next year. Instead, I was going to all these different farms, just trying to pick up numbers of sheds. Now, instead of wasting my time on finding 30 sheds off of bucks that I'll never even mess with, a specific buck that I'm after, I'll go in there and pretty much walk every inch of that, learn everything I can, and set myself up for next year. And then when that deer shows up on the field or shows up on a specific camera, I don't have to go back in there and tromping around. I kind of know what's happening. And if things start changing and I think maybe I'm not in the game, then I'll take my one jump in there that day and see what the heck's going on, and then use that to hunt the rest of my, let's say, October and then into November, I guess.
Okay. One last question here for you, and then we'll let you go about your day. What's one thing you would tell your 25-year-old self now that you have a ton more experience that you wish the 25-year-old Heath knew? It could be about anything.
There would be certain people I would listen to and other ones that I would completely ignore. I would not try to copy what person I think is real successful and try to learn stuff on my own. Just use bits and pieces and stuff from it. And then just put as much time as you can in before you, a lot of these guys are getting, they're married, they got a couple kids, then they then they get into hunting. I had all this time from when I was 13, let's say, to 30 before I had kids, spent all that time. So I learned all this valuable information, and that information is filling tags every year now. So when I have less time to hunt and because of family and work and all that kinds of stuff. So do everything you can to learn stuff while you're 25, 30 years old. And you can't, like right now with all this information on the internet, you just can't listen to everybody. You can listen to them, but a lot of the stuff's BS out there. It just isn't going to help you kill a deer. I mean, I can't, some public land hunter can't learn off of me if I'm hunting some farm that's got, like Lee and Tiffany have, with crops everywhere and box blinds and all this stuff. You're not going to learn stuff like that, or you're not going to learn from a guy who kills giant deer every year, but he's hunting out of a ground blind and hunting over a corn pile. I mean, they're not teaching you anything. You're not learning anything. And a lot of kids these days, in Ohio especially, that's what people are doing. They're sitting in pop-up blinds over corn piles, and they're not learning anything about hunting. And they're not getting to share the experience, in my opinion, that being, really hunting is like, because you get out there, you have failures, you move from tree to tree, location to location, you get to see all this different stuff. I don't know, everybody's different though.
Yeah, it comes down to what their goals are, but I would agree that, one last question, I lied. Would you so you hunt out of a tree stand in, let's say, even there's the big debate about box blinds and containing your scent and getting away with more. Do you just not like hunting out of a box blind, or what's your thought?
So first off, I have a box blind. I got a small farm, 40 acres. I have a box blind on it. I built that box blind when my daughter was 2.
Okay.
I have 2 daughters. So I built that box blind specifically for them to hunt out of. Now, I've shot does and stuff out of it. My daughters have shot like 4 bucks out of it with a crossbow or a muzzleloader and stuff. That box blind, I don't care what way the wind's blowing, I can hunt out of that box blind. It does not matter. When I open that window, I have 45 seconds of a
Yes.
downwind deer before they nail me.
Yeah.
And it's like cheating. I mean, in my opinion, it is now.
Yeah.
I do it. I take my daughters over there. I don't hunt out of it myself. I don't kill any bucks out of it or whatever. But I take my daughters over there to kill deer and stuff. But I mean, it's just
It's
I
a
don't
cheat
know.
code in your mind.
To each their own.
Uh-huh.
But man, live. And then plus being in that thing, it's like you're sitting in the house. You don't get to see listen to a squirrel coming down a tree, a woodpecker laying behind you, get the wind in your face. I mean, I seen something on social media the other day. Some guy was out there hunting, said, it was 15 below wind chill factor and it was 8 degrees. And I struggled through it and killed this deer. Well, come to find out, he was sitting in a box blind with a heater over a standing cornfield. And good for him. But man alive, it's just not hunting to me, but everybody's different. So
yeah, I hate hunting out of them as well, to your points. And it's really to your point, like I feel like you're just not like, you're not in the game. Like you don't get to hear, you don't get to smell everything. You don't get to, to your exactly how you described. I'm in the same.
Yeah.
boat.
The wind blows. You just feel the box blind shake. It isn't hitting you in the face and you got to dig deeper in your pockets for your hand warmers. Now, like I said, I probably, people will criticize me for my daughter's hunting with a crossbow. My daughter's hunting out of a box blind. I just try to get them out in the field.
Sure.
And maybe some kids, that's what you got to do. And some people, that's what they're going to do. But my daughter can go over there. She can sit there and play on her phone and do all this. And then when deer come through, we can do whatever and open the window and she can shoot one. I mean, it's to each their own.
For sure. Absolutely. Well, Heath, really appreciate your time. It's always good to catch up. If people want to follow along what you have going on or maybe watch some of your hunts, where should they go to see those?
So I'm mainly do my hunting stuff on Instagram. It's just Heath Cisco. And then I produce film and help produce a little bit with Byron on the Whitetail Addictions. It's on Lone Wolf Custom Gear YouTube page.
Awesome. Yeah. And I've said it 1,000 times on this Exodus podcast, not 1,000, but I've said it a handful of times. My favorite podcast of all time is with you and Cody and Ryan with the Whitetail Legacy podcast about hunting the rut. When I'm struggling, I go back and listen to that. And I try to emulate my day of how you describe. So I've said it on here live, but I want to say it to you in person. So I really appreciate that. But all right, Heath, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And appreciate all the content you guys put out there.